Welcome back to the series, guys. In episode 2, we're going to get Visual Studio Code set up for working with .NET with our extensions. We're going to dive into the code, take a look at what's going on, run the code from within Visual Studio, and then also get Postman set up so we can test all of our API endpoints real easily right here on our desktop. First, let's jump into our extensions. Now this is a fresh install of Visual Studio Code, so I don't have anything installed currently. First, we're going to need the C# language package from Microsoft. Let's go ahead and install that. Next, let's look for the auto using C# extension from Fudge. Usings in C# are your imports like you would use in PHP. So this allows us to easily add those using statements to your files as you're writing your code. The last one we want to look for is the .NET Core commands. This is by Matid Jarmke. I don't know how that's pronounced. This allows us to run the CLI commands easily from within Visual Studio Code, so you don't have to jump back and forth between the code editor in your terminal. If you like to use the terminal, feel free to use it. This just makes a few things a little bit easier. Let's install that. Alright, so now let's go ahead and open our folder. Let's go into where the code is stored, Songs API, and open it up. Now let's take a look at our directory structure here. We've got two directories we will not be using. That's our bin and our obj. The bin, our binary, is where our compiled project lives, and the object directory here is used for compilation as well as debugging. So it's things that the compiler needs, but we really don't care about these at all. We'll come back to the controllers in a minute. Inside properties, we have our launch settings. This is where we can say things like go ahead and launch the browser when the app is up and running locally. We're going to use IIS Express, which is our web server. So you have Apache Nginx. IIS Express is Microsoft's version. Just some various things about launching the application. App settings. These are kind of like your .env files in Laravel, where you can put things that are specific to that version. So in development, you may have logging information. You'll have your connection strings for the database. You can have an app settings for release, which are going to have different information for your release version, things like that. We have a README. I just put this in here for our repository. We have the CS_proj file. This will have all of our dependencies that we are loading in from NuGet. NuGet is the package manager like you would use npm for JavaScript. NuGet is the Microsoft.NET repository for third-party libraries. And lastly, we've got two files here, program and startup. Program is the initial entry point into our application. So when .NET runs, it looks for this program file, and it's looking for this public static void main. This is the entry point into our application, and it's just basically here to start up the web host and let it run. That's all this is really doing here. So it is calling the startup file here. Startup is where it really configures all of the web information. We will be using this a bit later, as we will want to add singletons for dependency injection. We can configure our database connection. All that will be happening here. But for the most part, this is kind of a mess with it once and kind of forget it. We're not going to be modifying it a whole lot. Now let's dig into what we do know. We did, in the last episode, go to an endpoint called API/values. So let's take a look at our controllers. Inside of our controllers, as we'd expect, we have a values controller. And this is where we wire up our routing, is inside of our controller. So inside here we have the route of API/ and then controller. This could very well be values, and it would still work the same. This magic keyword controller is going to take the name of the controller and remove the word controller, so you have API/values. If we change this to something else, like Chris controller, the API you would go to would be API/Chris. It would work the same. So that's just an introduction to how routing works. We also have attributes on the endpoints themselves. So like here, where we're saying we're going to get and it's going to return those two values that we saw, we just put an HTTP GET here. So this makes it so that when you do an HTTP GET to API values, you'll return this array of value 1 and value 2. If you're going to post to API/value, since it's the same endpoint, we want to decorate it with the HTTP post so that this endpoint fires when you hit a post. So let's demonstrate that by getting Postman up and running. Postman is a great tool for interacting with APIs. Let's go to our terminal. Let's go ahead and do .NET run. Get our application up and running. There we go. And let's go to https localhost 5001/API/values. And let's go ahead and send. Now we got an error here. The issue is because we're using HTTPS, but the SSL certificate is a locally generated one by IIS Express. It's not a real SSL certificate. So to fix this, we're going to go to File, Settings, and turn off this SSL certificate verification. Once that's off and we hit send, we now get our response just like we saw in the last episode. Let's modify this a little bit. We can add in another value here. This is a test. Go ahead and hit save. And let's restart our web application here. Let's hit the endpoint again. And now we get our this is a test as well as the first two values. Now you're probably thinking to yourself that it's a pain to have to restart the application every time we make a change to the code. And you are absolutely correct, that is a pain. So .NET has a command called watch. You can say .NET watch and run, and this will watch your project for changes and automatically restart the application for you. So we've got this running. Postman still gives us back the 3 results. If we go to our code and we remove this is a test and I save, you'll see that here on my terminal it's already restarting the application for us. So we can just go right back into Postman, hit send again, and we'll get our response. Let's create a collection here in Postman. We'll call it the Songs API. And I'm going to save this to our Songs API. And we'll just call it Get All Songs. So now we can easily come back to this. Let's make a new request. We want to get just a single value from this values controller. If we look in here, we have another HTTP GET, and it's asking for an ID. So the way this works is it'll get /API/values/ID, and that ID is passed into our parameter here. So instead of returning value, let's say we're going to return the ID. Or even better, let's do a string. We'll say the ID is ID. Adding the $sign here in front of a string allows us to do some interpolation with variables. So in this case, ID is going to be passed in right here, and it'll say the ID is, and then whatever we pass it. So in Postman, we'll say API/values/123. Go ahead and hit send. The ID is 123. That's exactly what we were expecting. So that's all there really is to a basic web API that's built out of the box by the .NET CLI. Everything else is up to you to build, and we're going to get started building on our actual Songs API in the very next episode. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, hit the thumbs up if you like this video, and I'll see you in the next episode.